Tonight, the Catholic faithful saying goodbye to former Archbishop Cardinal Edward Egan. The Archdiocese of New York says Egan died this afternoon at a New York hospital, and tonight we'll have a look back at some of his achievements in New York, as well as a one-on-one conversation I had. And the New York State Senate backs a move to institute term limits for members of the state legislature. How do New Yorkers feel about the practice, and is it a good or a bad move here for good government? Plus, we will turn to the race for the White House, where two political legacies may come face to face and leave their families behind as they make a name for themselves in the race for the nation's top job. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you very much for joining us. And tonight, as we all know, winter weather conditions were rough today, and it made for not only a difficult commute all across our region, but if you missed it late this morning here, take a look at the scene at LaGuardia, where Delta flight from Atlanta skidded off the runway and went through a fence, narrowly missing a body of water. We're going to have more images for you. Just an unbelievable scene there. Authorities say more than a dozen people were hurt. Thankfully, none of those injuries considered serious. And we'll have a weather update from meteorologist Jeff Denoyers coming up later. But first, we begin with some sad news. A death that has the Catholic faithful mourning tonight. Former Archbishop Cardinal Edward Egan, he passed away. The Archdiocese of New York says that Egan died this afternoon at a New York hospital following cardiac arrest. He was 82 years old. I had the opportunity to speak with the Cardinal 2 years ago. We spoke just as the Vatican was going about searching for a new pontiff. And among our topics of conversation were about the politics as well as the state of the Catholic Church. The global appetite right now for Catholics, would it be to move the culture wars to the side, not to change the positions of the doctrine of the church, but just to focus more on the more than 1 billion people in this world living in poverty? Sure. What do you think?
Well, I did it that way.
Yeah.
That's exactly the way I did it. The reason we kept our schools open was I was a Franciscan beggar. Now, I did it in a different way. I did my begging in my living room at my dining room table, and if I might say, I was not unsuccessful. We poured tens of millions of dollars into the inner city schools, tens of millions of dollars into the suburban schools. I can tell you practically the budget of every one of the schools. And there are many ways to take care of the poor, and one is to encourage others to support. We rebuilt ourselves financially, and we increased the enrollment for the poor. We didn't decrease it. And I told you about Catholic Charities. In 9 years, the budget went up 126%. Now, what we do for the poor, both in Catholic Charities, in our schools, and in 1,000 other ways, is never discussed in the press. The press will discuss these kinds of issues that you mentioned, and that's life. That's the way it's going to be. But I can assure you that the achievement of the Archdiocese of New York in the area of service to the poor is immense.
Maybe it's just memory, but it seemed that 15, 20 years ago in church, there was less about the culture wars than we'll hear on Sundays, and more about feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and the basic premise sure. of looking out for those that don't have as much. Right. I talk to other people in the pews. I don't think I'm alone in that Sundays have gotten, for too many of us, too political, and the basics of what the church was, and not about the social debates, forgetting who's right and wrong on it. Do you hear that too?
Oh, surely, but I'm going to take a bow. In my 9 years, do you know of one time that I was involved in a political discussion?
I would hazard the guess is no.
I've been very, very careful not to ever get involved. I'm friendly to all the politicians. I have great respect for the people who are our political leaders. It's not easy, and many of them do excellent, excellent work. but I have been very careful never to make a partisan statement or to get involved in any partisan politics at all. And I believe that's the right way to go.
I want to bring in our panel right now Richard Brodsky, former Democratic New York State Assemblyman, now a senior fellow at Demos as well as a professor at NYU. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Bill O'Reilly, Republican strategist, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. And, you know, Bill, he was brought in very difficult times, and there was a difficult window there. Obviously the scandals that rocked the church, and he wasn't free of them in terms of even Bridgeport when he oversaw that, and then some of the payoffs for some of the abuse cases, but also the math of the church where the laity, fewer people in the pews. He had to shutter some churches. He also had to shut down some parochial schools. He was thought by some he was a bad guy, but he didn't really have many choice in that respect. Certainly an interesting, if not, I would say a difficult chapter he had to preside over.
Yeah, I mean, he was a serious guy, and he was, in contrast to Dolan, who's serious but a lot of fun. And Dolan will take up a room and just light up the place. Egan wasn't like that. I got several chances to meet with him and sat with him at a couple of lunches, and he was serious, sober-minded. We asked him last year during the Astorino campaign to make fun of Rob in a spoof video. And he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't make fun of him. He ended up saying something very nice about him, but he wouldn't say something negative even for a fun video. He was a serious guy, but he did a very good job in difficult times, and it is, a lot of people are going to miss him. This was sudden. I guess he wasn't sick. I guess it was a heart failure.
Yeah, it was cardiac arrest. When you served in Albany, obviously it coincided with some of the same during his stewardship of the archdiocese.
He was given a tough job by the church, and that was to downsize the hospitals, the schools, the parishes. These are not decisions that will ever make you popular.
Yep.
He did the job he was given, and he did it with professionalism and compassion. But he was also following a very charismatic guy in John O'Connor.
Yep.
But you do the task your institution asks you to do. He did it well, and he was a figure of importance in the state.
You know, Dominic, it was interesting in that long conversation I had, and this was while the Cardinals were trying to figure out who would be the next pope. He took a not so subtle jab, and he said, well, when I said, well, we had a crew that we were sending out to the Vatican. I said, any recommendations for where they maybe want to go check, grab a bite or whatever else, because he actually taught at the Vatican for a while here. And he said, unlike others, I don't like to entertain and travel, whatever, which was not so veiled shot as his successor. He and Dolan weren't always on the best terms.
Let's face it, there's politics in the church as well. I mean, I know it's something that's not really played up, but they have their in-house politics. But I guess the best way to look at Cardinal Egan is what in a statement that the former mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, released tonight, in which Bloomberg acknowledged that they had a close relationship. They often had dinner. He was a confidant for the mayor. And let's not forget that he was the cardinal in New York at the time of 9/11.
Yep.
And that was a major, major role. He did it with class, and he had a tough job from the archdiocese and so on. But he did it, and, he weathered the storm during tough times for the Catholic Church.
And Andrew, to that end, one of the things defining his time was 9/11, and I know that he made great efforts. In fact, if people should look at that quote, I don't have it handy, for what Michael Bloomberg said. He said, but how many places but in New York could you have a Jewish guy going into St. Patrick's to do Passover of less, and he mixed everything that was New York. It was really a good line, and there was a genuine relationship, but really interesting chapter, not just in New York, but with the church that he presided over.
Well, being the Archbishop of New York is never just an exclusively religious position. I mean, it really is a social position. You're one of the more visible people in the city of New York, and you can certainly do your part to foster a sense of comedy with a T, especially in difficult times. So condolences to everybody who will be missing him tonight.
Yep. And when we come back after this quick break here, we're going to transition to the world of politics. We're going to head up to Albany, where there's a move to institute term limits for New York State lawmakers, taking a step forward in that process. But the question is this good or bad? And there's two ways to look at it. Term limits in terms of who can be, chairman of certain committees here for only a couple of terms, or term limits overall for lawmakers. I'll ask the table if New York will be better or worse off if that ever comes to be.